Hi guys, today I'm showing you how to make a trinket dish in 7 different sizes. If you've been on my channel before, you might have seen my charm pack trinket dish video, and this has probably been my favorite thing to ever make. I feel like I've made about 100 of these, and I just keep going because they're so fun to sew. So where this small version is designed for a charm pack, I decided to try making them out of layer cakes as well. After I made the layer cake version, I just wanted to keep going and make them in every different size you could. This is Clementine here to help us out again today. And so, like the original size, these ones are also fully reversible, and you can enjoy both sides of the fabric if you want to. With the different sizes for this project, you can also make them into nesting baskets. And aside from being cute, I'm not sure what point you would actually ever want for nesting baskets, because really the point of these is to use them. But I thought it would be cute to design it anyway so that they all nest inside each other. The nice thing about this project is that you really don't need a pattern to make it because all you're doing is just sewing squares together. And so instead of designing a pattern, I decided to make this chart that you can print out with the size to cut your fabric and the finished size of the basket, and then the size that you're going to cut the corner out. So you can make these really in any size that you want. So this is a free download in my Ko-fi shop, and I will leave a link for that in the description so you can get it. You can make these with any fabric that you have as long as it's the right size, and it definitely doesn't need to be a layer cake. This is great for making the largest size because these do come pre-cut in 10-inch squares. The first thing you're going to want to do is check the chart and then choose which size you want to make. For each one of these, you're going to need 4 squares of fabric, with 2 of them for the outside and 2 of them for the inside. And because these are reversible, it really doesn't matter. They're going to look the same on the inside as the outside. So basically, when you're choosing the outside fabric, you're just choosing the one that you want to put the batting on the back of. And it really doesn't matter which one it is unless you want to do quilting on the outside, because you will have that on whichever piece you primarily want to be the outside of the dish. If you do want to do quilting, you'll attach your fabric to the batting and quilt through it and the batting. You need your liner fabric and your outer fabric to be separate, so make sure you're not quilting through both layers. To attach the batting to the back, I use a fabric adhesive like this, but you also can use fusible batting that already has an adhesive on it and just iron it onto the back of your fabric. If you do want to sew multiple sizes, or if you want to make lots of baskets at the same time, I recommend that you attach the batting to the back of your fabrics ahead of time so you can do them all at once, because it's really easy to chain piece by sewing the top seams together all at the same time. So what you're going to do for any of the sizes, they're all exactly the same, is lay your outer fabrics right sides together with your liner fabrics. Because these are squares, it doesn't really matter what side is pointing up unless you have a print with a directional pattern to it. So on this fabric, the little fleur-de-lis pattern is actually sort of pointing in a direction. So I'm going to make sure that those fabrics are just both pointing to the same direction. When you have them laid right side together, you're going to pin across the top edge. Because I'm making all the sizes at once, I'm just going to set these aside and keep doing that with the rest of my pile, so that all of these are paired up with their liners. Now that we have them all paired up, we're just going to sew across the top edge with a 1/4-inch seam allowance across each one of these. And you can chain piece by sewing the seam and then continuing into the next piece without cutting the thread in the middle. Once you have the top sewn across all of your pieces, you can just trim the thread between the pairs so that the sizes stay together. After you've sewn the tops on all of these, you're going to press them so that the liner is pointing away from the outer. And I like to do it so that the seam is underneath the liner, and that's because it's a little bit thicker under the batting, and it'll lay nicer if you iron it that way. After pressing, you're going to take each one of your pairs and fold it so the right sides are together. You want to make sure you're lining up the seams in the middle here so the basket looks really nice when it's finished. And then you're going to pin or clip all the way around the outside. After clipping these, we're going to sew around the outside. You're going to start about here and sew with a 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around until you get here. And you want to leave an opening in the middle so you can turn the bag after you're done sewing it. And each one of these sizes is sewn in the exact same way. After sewing around each of the rectangles, you're going to trace the corners on with a piece of tailor's chalk. And to do that, you're going to need a ruler and the chart that tells you what size to cut the corners for each size of basket. So this is the 4-inch basket, which is the smallest one, and the corner cutting size is 3/4 of an inch. So I'm going to use my quilting ruler to trace a 3/4 inch square onto each one of these corners. Once I have these traced on, I'm going to cut them out with fabric scissors. Here's how that looks after cutting the corners. I'm going to trace corners onto the rest of my pieces and repeat this process. In the size chart, the corners go up by 1/4 inch for each size, so it's pretty easy to follow which size you need to cut the corners. Once you've cut the corners out, you're going to take your piece and slide the corner so that the seams are lined up in the middle. You're going to point one of them one way and one the other direction. And then you're just going to sew across here with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And you'll repeat that on every corner of every basket. On the corners, you are going to want to make sure you backstitch on the edges so that these are nice and secure. One little trick for doing this is that you want to make sure the seam allowances are pointing in the same direction on the bottoms, and it also helps if they do that on the sides as well. You can see here that this side is pointing down, and I have this side pointing down as well. So before turning the bags, you can check for any areas where there's a lot of bulkiness and trim that off with some fabric scissors. Just be careful not to trim into your stitching or get too close to it. Then you're going to turn them right side out using the opening in the bottom. So this is the smallest one and it's super cute. I'm going to turn the rest of them and then we will stitch the bottoms of the liners. At this point, they're probably going to look a little lumpy and frumpy, but they'll look a lot better after we iron them and do some top stitching along the edge. But before that, I like to stitch the liner closed with an invisible ladder stitch. The reason I recommend doing an invisible ladder stitch instead of using your machine to sew this is that it makes the stitching on the liner practically invisible, and that way you can turn the bag and make it reversible. So to do the ladder stitch, you're going to fold the raw edges so they're pointing to the inside, and they're folded under by about 1/4 inch on both sides of the opening. And what I like to do is pinch them together while I'm sewing and hold them like that. Then I'm taking my needle and I'm poking it from the wrong side to the right side. And then I'm just going to stitch from one side to the other using very small stitches to close up this opening. When you have the liner stitched across the bottom, you're going to want to tuck the fabric inside so that it's even along this edge, and then press around here with your iron. The last step is to do some decorative stitching along this top edge, and this is optional, but I think it helps them look nicer, especially when you turn them. On the smallest sizes, the easiest way to do this is to put the basket into your machine like this so that you're facing the lining towards yourself, and then stitch around, rotating it and keeping the top part out of the way as you sew. On the larger sizes, you can do that as well, where you sew with the lining facing you, or you can sew them like this over the free arm of your machine with the outer fabric facing you. I find this method is easier. The only reason I don't do it on the small sizes is just because it's not physically possible.